It's October 31st, Halloween. That means it's time for a new 31 on 31. 31 horror movies ranked on October 31st. This year's theme, The New Breed. Hi, my name is Sean, and I love to talk about movies and TV way too much. With that in mind, go ahead and join me down below in the comments section. Share your ranking of all 31 movies from the new breed of horror directors, or as many as you've seen. My list is not the right list. You're not going to agree with it? I barely agree with it. It's just my list, and I would love to see yours, so please join me down below in the comment section. And when we say the new breed, we're talking about the horror movie directors, the icons of the space that have emerged over the last 20 years. A lot of them from the last 10 years that are these new voices bringing a new flavor to the world of horror. Some of these are movies that I've absolutely loved over the last 10 years. Some of them are movies that I watched for the very first time last night and was not crazy about so much, but that's the fun of these, and that's why we do this as a community. Both you guys joining down below in the comment section, as well as 31 on 31 being a series from the Autop stream. That's me, Cody Leach, Brian Lomax, CP, and Rudy. Each of us will be doing our own 31 on 31 video, sharing them today. Please go support their channels, watch their videos, comment, subscribe to their channels, all of that fun stuff, and be on the lookout in the future for when we ever do our debrief and debate why we put which ones where we did, why we love certain ones, why certain ones aren't for some of us. This one will be very, very interesting because some of us were very excited by Terrifier 2 and 3, and one of us despises those movies, and some of the ones that I watched recently, boy, did I not like them. We'll start talking about those very shortly because let's get started. In last place, Titane. Now, I went into this one knowing very little about it besides some murmurs about a girl in a car and something about a car accident, like a plate in someone's neck or something like that. Didn't really know anything about the plot, didn't know that it wasn't in English, anything like that. And the movie's kind of like, sometimes your friend takes you out to a new restaurant from different culture, different style of food or whatever, and you try it and you go, I didn't like that, but I'm glad I tried it. And other times they take you out to try something new, they give you something to eat, and you give it a try and you go, that's not for me, and why on earth did you make me eat that? I don't appreciate that at all. That second one, that was my experience watching Titane. I mean, I didn't get it at all. It's got like a 90% on Rotten Tomatoes. A bunch of my critic friends were like, oh, it's really good. You got to watch this one. And like, this is so far from anything that I am interested in, where legitimately a girl does have sex with a car and becomes pregnant. That's the start of the movie. It's wild. It's unexpected. It's bizarre, but it all feels like shocking and bizarre for its own sake, rather than in anything that seemed meaningful for me. It just felt gross. I wanted to take a shower while I was watching the movie. Everything was unsettling in uninteresting ways. It was just like, I just don't like this. I don't like where you're going. I don't know why these firemen are dancing all of the time. I can understand kind of the themes you're trying to touch on here of codependency and trauma and identity and gender expectations, but I'm not getting anything out of it. It also felt like a movie that was like ADHD with its ideas, like there's a car accident and they put a plate in her head and she's in love with cars. She's a serial killer. She's pregnant with a car. She's taking someone's identity. She's becoming a fireman. Like, what? Like all the serial killer stuff, like, okay, this is kind of interesting. Oh, nope, we're leaving all that behind to dance with a fireman who wants her to be his son, even though it's pretty obvious that's not what's happening. You're like, okay, I mean, I'm glad some of you get a lot out of this movie. I got nothing out of this movie. It made me go like, if this is what other people think is cinema, I guess I don't like cinema. I don't like movies after all, because what on earth did I just watch? Number 30, Raw. This movie is from the same director as Titane, and not terribly surprising, this one was also really not on my wavelength. I didn't have nearly as strong of like a revulsion to this one as I did to Titane, which I just utterly rejected. This one just wasn't for me, where generally speaking, I'm not super into coming of age metaphor movies where you have some sort of, a lot of them are werewolf movies. This one's a cannibalism movie tied into a coming of age tale, and the transformation they're going for is a visual representation of the transitions that so many of us go through in life, whether the puberty or, in the case of this movie, the transition into college and discovering yourself and your desires. And okay, I mean, I kind of get it. I kind of get what you're saying, but also don't really. I thought a lot of it was just nasty in all the wrong ways. Like, there's a sequence in this movie where in a very short window of time, you watch what is a horse pooping straight from the butt, girls peeing, and then waxing pubes. Like, and this is like 2 minutes apart, and like, what is with the scatological, like, we're getting way too close to body parts, and what is happening here? And then just in general, like, just the ideas of sisterhood with this just wretched sister that's doing awful things and pushing her sister to be like I just didn't connect with it or get what they were going for. So, not nearly as off-putting to me as Titane, or as weird as the movie where the girl is impregnated by a car, but also like whatever cannibalism metaphor was going through in coming age, like I didn't connect with it at all. 29, Midsommar. This is one that I know has many fans, and I am certainly not one of them, where in the sense that it's shot with confidence, there's some cool transitions in the movie, the acting is really good. On all those levels, it's handled really well. When it comes to the actual plot and themes and message, I don't think it works at all, where it's the story that, like, set up well enough, people going off to visit this obscure ritual, you go, okay, fair enough. But as soon as things start getting wild and crazy, you start feeling like, wait a minute, why aren't people doing more things than they're to get it? Like, what is going on here? And it takes way too long for too little to happen. And the big culmination, when it starts pulling together all of its ideas on toxic relationships and things like that, I found its message to be kind of offensive, irresponsible. Like, I don't know what you think I'm supposed to feel in this big crescendo at the end of the movie, but you're not convincing me that her boyfriend was this awful guy that deserved this horrible death or whatever you're going for here, where, like, he's literally date raped and then burned to death for it. Like, I know there's more going on here, but there's really big problems with whatever this movie's trying to do. So I don't enjoy this one at all. 28, The Blackcoat Daughter. I watched this one without any point of reference besides knowing it was Osgood Perkins. He did Longlegs. That will be much higher up on this list. So that was my only point of reference. No idea about the plot or anything like that with the film. And like, I found it to be mildly clever, mildly interesting, but the juice wasn't worth the squeeze. It just took so long to deliver so little. And the problem was the individual scenes, the little moments weren't scary enough, entertaining enough. They didn't have enough spark, spice, flavor to them to justify how long it was taking to get through them, to get to the payoff twist at the end where you're like, oh, okay, oh, that's kind of cool. So it's one that was just too dull to make the journey worthwhile. Next up, Dead Silence from James Wan. I'm actually a really big fan of James Wan. I thoroughly enjoy a good percentage of his movies, and one of the rare exceptions to that is Dead Silence, his follow-up to Saw. And there's some behind-the-scenes stuff where there were issues with the movie, and Lee Winnell wrote some blog posts about it that got pulled down, so we only have little excerpts of him talking about how the movie was kind of changed by the studio, and they weren't fully able to capture their vision for the movie. And So the movie, for me, it feels like I can almost see what it's going for. There's some twists, things that they're like, that's kind of interesting. But once again, a movie where I'm just not invested in the journey at all. I don't care about the characters. Ventriloquist dolls and things like that aren't something that interest me. And so much of the stuff kind of along the way, the subject matter I don't care about, the characters weren't particularly flashy. Even the fun one, Wahlberg, is kind of fun, but he's fun in this kind of stock, pull the character off the shelf kind of way of the detective that's like constantly shaving and stuff like that. That just feels like a cliche. It's fun because it's a Wahlberg, but otherwise it's just the cliche, and everyone else in the movie pretty forgettable besides, the shocking final images that are mildly interesting. And at the same time, I'm not sure that I fully believe them, like wasn't fully convinced in it. So, one that whenever I do my James Wan rewatches and even prepping for this video and everything like that is like, I have to rewatch Dead Silence. I've already seen it. 26, Us. Now this one is very frustrating for me, because I think that it's a pretty great home invasion movie with a director that puts unsettling images, fantastic performances in there. And when it's his home invasion movie with Winston Duke being all charming and funny and everything, like, I really dig it, and it would be way up on this list. But it's also shackled to a metaphor and commentary on the underclass of society that I think absolutely sabotages this movie. And it requires so much suspension of disbelief, and it's so over the top and outrageous that it's like a movie that just like cuts its own legs off. Just like it's running around doing great, and then it just trips itself. Throws there's some meme of the person riding their bike, throws the stick into their own spokes. That's what this movie is to me, because I so thoroughly enjoy such a high percentage of the movie, and the overall experience is utterly undone by the big twist reveals, the metaphors, all of that stuff. And it's another one where the messaging is so muddled and convoluted that whatever it's trying to say, it almost ends up arguing the exact opposite in light of, if you stop and think about, like, wait, what they're actually doing, shouldn't people, like, they are like psycho killers. Like, what are we doing here? What are we talking about here? Like, there's big problems. There's all this symbolism that it's just there. It doesn't seem to symbolize anything in particular. And so it's just irritating more so than enjoyable, despite all the actual plot of most of it being like very much my thing. 25, Infinity Pool. This is another first time watch from just a few days ago, and I didn't really know too much of what it was about. This one would probably talking about like Titane, where you watch the movie and you go, I didn't really like that, but I'm glad I watched it. That's a little bit what Infinity Pool is more for me. Titane is, I wish I hadn't watched it. Infinity Pool was like, okay, that's not really my thing. It wallows so much in like a certain crassness and nihilism that wasn't necessarily enjoyable, but it was thought-provoking. It was interesting and kind of comes up with this scenario of, outrageous situation that pulls in sci-fi, as well as just high concept governmental things to set up this, what if scenario with people that was interesting in many regards to like play it out and what would this person do and what would it do? What would the way that we're drawn to vices, drawn to darkness, whatever that is in us, even as it might make us sick and we might be repulsed by it, but we're interested, and there's ways that we have those tendencies in us. It's kind of interesting. At the same time, like I said, wasn't one that I thoroughly enjoyed or anything like that, but I did find interesting. 24, Never Let Go. I saw this one actually at its world premiere at Fantastic Fest to work the red carpet with Cody Leach, one of the other people doing these, and he actually got to interview Halle Berry on the red carpet for this movie. That was pretty cool. The movie itself, I felt it got better as it went along. the first part of it, without trying to get into spoilers too much, but the first half before some of the big twists happen in the middle of the movie, it didn't really work for me all that well. And then you get in the back half when it starts to really play things out and escalate, started to get kind of more and more interesting to me. Reminded me of this movie Frailty from about 20 years back from Bill Paxton, Matthew McConaughey, and with kind of the parent, and you don't know who you can trust, and is the parent a reliable narrator. So I dug those aspects of it, but the film overall didn't fully work for me. 23, Possessor. This is another first-time watch, and one that I watched with virtually no knowledge of what the plot was or what to expect. Hadn't seen a trailer or anything like that. Just the little summary before it started said something about a high-end assassin. I was like, okay, high-end assassin? With this image of this stretched-out face? I have no idea what I'm in for. And much like the director's other film on the list, Infinity Pool, is one that I can't say that I thoroughly, it was like really enjoyed and would rewatch, but it was a movie that was like, that's kind of interesting. Like, that's thought-provoking, and it takes a concept where there's the more obvious place to go with it, with action movie, action thriller, and makes it a psychological thriller. So naturally, as someone that loves action movies and I'm going to see this and sci-fi, and you have this setup for this great hitman movie with this technology of possessing other people, and it goes in this other direction. You know, there's a sense to it which missed out on the thing that I am specifically wired for, but it does this other thing that was, like I said, unlike anything I'd ever seen, and much more of this psychological thriller horror film with some body horror in there as well. I think also kind of built into that is it's a story about a person losing themselves and their identity. That's interesting, but when we don't know much about them, and what we do know is they kill people. It's tough to get super invested in that journey with them because there's such a big disconnect in some of what's happening. 22, Nope, the latest film from Jordan Peele. I liked this one a good bit more than Us. And it kind of reminded me of quite a few different things. There's a little bit of Tremors, a little bit of Jaws, except inland. There's some nice humor in it of people reacting to the insane stuff going on, but also somewhat like Us. It had the problem of just getting so bogged down in a metaphor that feels so heavy-handed. This one, the metaphor's a little bit more clear and obvious what it's trying to say, how it connects, but it's also just so on the nose. Hollywood is a machine that chews you up and spits you out. Literally in this movie. Almost literally in this movie. And so some of that where it just gets less like, okay, like, I was entertained. I dug a lot of it, but come on now. What are we doing? It's the sort of thing that makes me go like, I hope Jordan Peele's next movie, he really hits the brakes on the metaphors. He steps back and goes, what if I don't try and make a movie that is elevated and has this subtext and built-in metaphors making some big grand statement? Look, just make a movie. It can be about something, but it doesn't have to have this big overt metaphor. Because I think he is getting, the last two movies he's done, he's just gotten lost in these metaphors that have hurt the things that do work. Like, when it comes to like the characters, the dialogue, the individual scenarios and stuff, all that stuff works in both Nope and Us for me. But the metaphors, that's where it just it's like drags the whole thing down. Like, go more straightforward. 21, Ouija, Origin of Evil, point of reference. I enjoyed the rest of the movies on this list. So inherently when we do these, we're trying to pick like the best horror movies from the best directors that have emerged. So generally speaking, you're going to have a lot of movies that you're very positive on. And I like, to the credit of most of the movies lower on this list, they're almost all swings. They do something interesting, and it's not for me. It's not my taste. It's too weird. It's too out there. It's not on my wavelength. But they took a swing. They did something interesting. It just wasn't for me. And kind of from here on out, these are movies that I enjoy. Make of that what you will. But, so we have Mike Flanagan's Ouija sequel. The first one had like a 4% on Rotten Tomatoes. Like, everyone hated it. Mike Flanagan steps in as one of these kind of top horror directors of our time and absolutely elevates the material. Somehow does a prequel that dramatically is better than the first one. I actually shouldn't say that because I have not seen the first one because I've only heard horrible things about it. But as for me, I'm not typically super into this type of horror movie. It's not really my thing. And this one was well done. You cared about the characters, invested in the different, like, everything kind of taking place, and had a little bit of that Flanagan wit to it. So it was well done. But at the same time, I watched it just a few weeks ago, and there wasn't a lot about it that like popped in my mind. So of the movies that I'm like, yeah, I dug that, it's the one that I probably putting at the bottom, or I guess according to the way that I've done this, putting it at the bottom, kind of on that basis, that it just didn't pop in my mind. Bringing us into the top 20, MaXXXine. This is the third film in the X trilogy. I was very excited to see this film because the trailer just had this great 80s vibe to it. And while I haven't been as enamored with these movies as some people have been, it seemed like this one was moving into a space that had a lot of potential to very much kind of be my sort of thing. And I don't know, 60% of the movie was, and then there was like 40% that disappointed me, where it does have a fantastic 80s vibe, score, the setting, the atmosphere, really, really good. You're like invested in the lead character, MaXXXine, with what she's trying to do and everything like that. But then there's like kind of this last 40% of it where I didn't feel like the kills had any tension in them. It just felt like, instead of feeling like you're moving towards the edge of your seat in these scenarios, it just was like, guy showed up, person's dead. Just no tension whatsoever in the kills. Also, it was super obvious who the killer was. Like, literally in the opening scene, I was like, oh, okay, I know exactly where this movie's going. Like, literally in the opening scene, with the way that it decided to open it seemed very obvious where things were headed. And the third act, I didn't like hate it. It didn't ruin the movie for me, but it did feel like we went way in a different direction in the third act. So I dig a lot of it, but it overall kind of disappointed. 19, Terrifier. And this is a movie that I think what elevates it in my mind is simply how much of a DIY movie this really was. The production budget was $35,000. And Damien had this character that he knew there was something there, that people were interested in. Art the Clown. There was only so much he could do with his limited resources. And so he leaned into the thing that he thought his movie could do well. Kind of this shocking humor and horror, shocking gore, and Art the Clown's quirky humor.
In my head, I'm saying, why is somebody going to watch my $35,000 horror movie when they can go watch the biggest, newest $20 million Hollywood movie? Mm-hmm. I said, I have to put things in this that Hollywood is not allowed to show. That'll get people talking. And I wrote the hacksaw scene, and I said, even when people read it, like David read it, and he goes, "You're not going to like really show that, are you?" And I said, "I'm going to show everything you could possibly imagine." And
very dark, quirky humor, and I think that's what this movie does well. Plays a little bit like a demo tape for something better, and you will see Terrifier 2 and 3 way higher up on this list, where I think with a bigger budget, you get a bigger story out of it. And the first movie is sort of like the Terrifier short expanded to theatrical length, and it's proof of concept. Like, there's something there, but the story's very thin, very grindhouse, very simplistic setup of like, here's a series of people getting killed, little twist at the end, and the other movies take it up to a much higher level. 18X. Now, this is a movie I was a little bit late to the party on this one, and maybe people had talked it up a little bit too much to me, and maybe it's some of just the subject matter of people going out to shoot a porno isn't something I'm like, yeah, that's awesome, let's do it. Not exactly the Matt and Ron movie I'm running to check out, but I did think it was a good spin on doing these throwback thrillers of the, certainly flavors of Texas Chainsaw Massacre very clearly in there, but just a lot of those slashers of the 20-somethings, camp counselor types driving off to this obscure place and slowly getting killed off, but being more thoughtful than the vast majority of movies in the genre, and just having a little bit more depth with what it was trying to say and explore the scenarios that characters were put in. I mean, some of it I really did just kind of find pretty off-putting with the nature of the characters and things like that. And some of it was a little bit too weird for me. But mostly I can understand why a lot of people really love this film. 17, Smile, a movie which I had no expectations for going into it. I saw it at Fantastic Fest at its world premiere a couple years ago. And the trailers looked just totally generic to me of there's a weird gimmick thing that follows someone around and kills people. Like, okay, we've seen that movie many times before. And in particular, because it had this smile thing going on that reminded you of that with the Truth or Dare posters. I think that was the name of the movie. It was really bad. Kind of assumed the worst of this film, and it turned out to be pretty good. Where of these, there's a gimmick thing that follows a person around. It's definitely one of the better movies of that genre. It follows the template. There's a gimmick, and then the person's investigating how to defeat it. But what elevates it is that it was a movie that actually was exploring ideas about childhood trauma and ties that into the horror of what this person is dealing with and why people don't trust her, why she's doing what she's doing. And so a movie that had a lot more meat and substance to it than it would appear at first glance. Next up, The Exorcism of Emily Rose. Another first-time watch, checked it out a few weeks back. And another one, I didn't really know too much about it. I think I'd heard some murmurs, like a courtroom or something like that, but didn't really remember that when I pushed play. And another one that was a pretty big, pleasant surprise, where it takes a familiar genre, the possession film, exorcism film, and blends it with a totally different genre that is able to kind of give you a new perspective on the whole thing and changes the storytelling, changes the angles by which you explore things by being this courtroom drama. And through the courtroom drama and the dynamics they kind of even put into that of our defense attorney is the atheist and the prosecutor is the person of faith and the plaintiff, courtroom's right, the defendant is a Catholic priest that is on trial, and you're trying to figure out why is he doing what he's doing and what's driving all of his actions. So all of it had a different spin. It wasn't a movie that I loved and adored, but I was like, oh, this is a nice new way to tell a story like this. And by new, I mean the movie came out like 20 years ago, but it was just something just different enough in a very familiar genre that it could deliver all the things you expect while not playing out like most of these movies. 15, Hereditary. This is another one I was late to the party on, where everyone else, I saw it like 6 months after everybody else, and people hyping it up as the scariest movie of all time, or something like that. And, I don't tend to get scared by movies anyway, and certainly that wasn't the case with this movie, but what it does so well is just having a really unnerving atmosphere. The whole movie of just whether you're in the house, you're watching this girl, kids in a classroom or teenagers in a classroom listening, it just gets under your skin and feels off and wrong. And it just kind of keeps ratcheting up that tension throughout the entire movie. So you discover what's going on and, it's not really my flavor of horror. It's not the type that I gravitate towards naturally, but I did think it was a really good version of a type of movie that's not super duper my thing. 14, Malignant. This is another James Wan film on the list, and a pretty wild one at that, where the first half of this movie I thought was maybe a little bit too conventional. And then you start to realize what's going on, and you go, there it is. That's the reason James Wan wanted to tell this movie. Is for me, a movie that the back half of the movie saves the first half of the film, where you're like, well, that was a wild ride, and just goes for it and combines a lot of different things that James Wan has skill sets that he's developed over the years. It's the sort of movie that, like, I don't think he would have been able to make earlier in his career, and I don't know that he would have been able to make. But when he makes it between his several $100 million Aquaman films, and he just put out a couple of movies that made studios $1 billion, and he goes, I got this wild, crazy idea about, well, don't want to spoil things, but this is a strange family dynamic. Let's just say that. And it just, how bonkers it's allowed to get, the way that he's able to shoot action while still having the tension and scares. It's one that I probably like appreciate the bonkersness of it more than overtly just love the movie in general. But still, a movie that, like, you know, I talked about, like, where were we at on the list? Like, Ouija being a movie that just didn't really pop to me. There wasn't a lot that stood out about the film. You watch Malignant and you remember those images from the back half of this film. You remember when that twist happens. You're like, oh, whoa, whoa, whoa. And then you remember what happens next. And there's a sense to it of, like, it's the kind of movie where you watch it. Once you see the twist, you go, oh, now I want to rewatch it. In this, like, despite not being crazy about the first half, I wanted to watch it again in light of the information I got at the back half. 13, Sinister. This one is another one I was very late to the party on. Watched it for the first time just a month ago. And, like, I'd heard people say, oh, this is the scariest movie I've ever seen. I only made it 10 minutes into the film and I had to turn it off. And there's actually, like, articles about this movie about how, scientifically speaking, this is the scariest movie of all time, where they, like, connected people to heart rate monitors. And they've done this test multiple times. And Sinister is the movie that raises people's heart rate the most. You're overhyping the movie here. Like, you are way overselling this movie if you think that this is the scariest, most unsettling movie of all time. All of that said, I thought it was good. I thought it was interesting. And much like Exorcism of Emily Rose, the other Derrickson movie on the list, it's a movie that I felt like had its own angle on things. That we've got a lot of these kind of possessed house movies where things keep getting worse and terrible things start happening to the family or whatever. That movie happens all the time, and this one kind of finds this angle through these snuff films and this author that you're just approaching it. It's the similar subject matter, similar tension, similar jump scares as other movies had, but you're approaching it from this different angle it's a fresh skin for a familiar template. And so it worked well at that. Scariest movie of all time? No. Come on now. Let's be serious here. I legitimately, it's one of those ones where it's like, oh, that was really good. That was really well. Okay, cool. That would be my, like, I'd have to be, like, more positive about it if I didn't have. You feel like you're, like, counterbalancing people way overselling a movie when you have a movie that people just talk about with so much hyperbole, even scientific studies. Like, this one is the scariest? Really? Next up, we have Crawl. And point of reference, pretty much the rest of the movies on this list, I just really enjoy, and I'm only really going to be saying positive things about them. Probably even should have thrown Sinister into this. I was kind of negative on it, but it was only negative from the perspective of the hyperbole. It was from the point of hyperbole. I think let's dial it back from that. But I only have really positive things to say about the movie Sinister. And same with the movie Crawl. I really enjoy tight survival escape horror films where there's, like, this sense of isolation, people in a dangerous environment trying to escape. And in the case of this movie, it's kind of two different things of there's this flood, and you've got the gators showing up to eat them. So the flood in and of itself would be horrifying, terrifying to try. How do you survive these weather conditions with the injured dad and everything like that? Throw into the mix, gators popping up wherever you go. And put the two together, and for me, that's like a really good thriller. Like, this is very much my kind of thing. It's not trying to be like a A+ kind of movie, but like when you're talking about just like a solid, simple survival thriller, this is very much my kind of thing, and I think it did a good job of kind of putting me on the edge of my seat. And it's in a very limited number of environments, but being just the right conflict, just the right obstacle, and we overcome one thing, we discover the next one, the gators show up, and it keeps doing that, and it keeps using all of the different things, injuries, drowning, gators, trying to get to supply, like all the things, just the right amount, and doesn't overstay its welcome to be a real effective little survival thriller. And I got to talk to the director on the red carpet for the movie Never Let Go, talking about how he kind of crafts some of those situations to put you on the edge of your seat.
One of the things I think is so great about your films is your ability to have these fantastical stories but find relatable fears. How do you craft those moments that are so human in a story that's larger than life?
I always go back to myself as a moviegoer, as a person, and I always try to dig within my own nightmare and my own fear, because I cannot think for other people. I just can imagine, what will really scare me, and if I'm lucky, some other people will be scared as well.
Number 11, Pearl, the middle movie in the X trilogy, the prequel about Pearl, and for me, this was easily my favorite film in the trilogy. And some of it was because it was just so different, where it's a prequel to this movie that's like heavily inspired by Texas Chainsaw Massacre, about people shooting a porno. And then the movie itself, this Pearl, the prequel to it, is inspired by The Wizard of Oz. And it's just so different. And still kind of has these explorations of character and identity. And the Pearl character, very much for me, is what kind of elevates it, where you have this person that is so naive and sheltered, yet so psychotic and dangerous, that she's so unbelievably compelling. And Mia gives just a tremendous performance of just what she's able to emote, and how you're able to feel sympathy for her as this naive girl. And almost you can watch the transition as you go from like, oh, poor Pearl, to like, oh no, Pearl. And just you can see it in her face when the psycho, the crazy comes out, and she's so good at it. And so much, it's just embodied by like the final shot of her holding this smile for so long that's unsettling. Really good. Bringing us into the top 10, Oculus, another one where I was late to the party. I watched this for the first time just a few weeks back. Another one where I went in knowing almost nothing about this movie. Like, I didn't know Katie Sackhoff was in it. I didn't know Karen Gilliam was in it. Like, I didn't know any of this stuff that would be interesting to me, that would have caused me to watch this movie earlier. All I knew was Mike Flanagan directed it, and it's named after my son's VR headset. That's all I knew about the movie. And much like I've talked about a couple of these, I just thought it was such a clever spin on the haunted house. Just finding that new angle on it, that way to approach the genre that I go, oh, I haven't seen this before. This is fresh. This is new. In the case of this movie, we're watching both the original one that would be the standard classic version of this story of people move into a house and they go crazy and kill each other and stuff with a gimmick. So we get that movie in here, but it's paralleled with the story set in the future where the kids have grown up, and one of them at least knows why they're going in. One of them knows what this place is, how dangerous it is, and is coming up with a plan to defeat it and play with it. And just haven't seen that before. And by combining the two at the same time, you're able to kind of get the best of both worlds, of all of the classic thrills of this discovery, as well as the attempts to outsmart it and defeat it. All of it kind of coming to this finale conclusion that's gut-wrenching, horrifying, in all the right ways, and feels earned. It was all of the rules, everything that happens is properly set up. So when you get to the final twists, reveals, it's earned. and thus satisfying. Number 9, Smile 2. As I mentioned earlier, I went into the first Smile not really expecting much and being pleasantly surprised. And somehow I went into Smile 2 also not expecting much and being very surprised. Where I thought, based on this ranking you could tell, I thought Smile 2 was quite a bit better than Smile 1. And maybe even in the ranking, maybe this disproportionately, it doesn't, maybe that's overselling it because there's a number of the movies in that kind of 20 to 14 range. They're all kind of like tied in my mind. I didn't know what order to put them in. I had them all in there for different sorts of reasons. But for me, what I thought this movie did really well is it has all the elements that worked in the first movie, but puts them in a more fun and lively environment, where first movie's pro bono therapist, it's just a dryness to that. And you take that and you put it in the world, the gimmick, and you put it in the world of a pop star who's been through rehab and is trying to rebuild her image. All of a sudden, that's a more lively environment. It's a much more public environment. And it found that new emotional anchor and hook about rehab, rebuilding trust, self-hate, all these different things. So it still has the depth, the substance to it, but in an environment that I think just amplifies everything. I think there's like a lot of assuredness in the direction, where just like a movie that felt there was a lot of confidence. There's a lot of great transitions. Like sometimes with movies, not in this list, but in other words, you talk about a movie that feel like you feel them reworking it in the editing room. There's rumors of reshoots and things like that. It just feels a little bit duct taped together. Smile 2's the opposite of that, where it just felt like the director knew exactly the movie they were setting out to make. Like, I've got it. Let's do this. It's just assuredness to it, and the camera work, the tension, the environment. So for me, it just took everything I enjoyed about the first movie and just did it better. Bigger and better. Number 8, Ready or Not. As I've mentioned before, I love these isolated survival thrillers where people are put in this tight environment. They have to try and escape. That's what this movie is. Combine it with a great cast and a fun subgenre, where it's a little bit of horror comedy, humor built into it. Samara Weaving is one of the horror queens of our time. You got Adam Brody, Andy McDowell, like the whole ensemble here, really, really good. Actors that a number of them I felt like I hadn't seen in a while, or I hadn't seen them in something fun like this, and was like great to I love seeing Andy McDowell, Adam Brody in something like this. It was like really exciting, and it's the genre that I enjoy with kind of that fun vibe to it. So for me, this is like a movie just tailor-made for me. I will say this, I've never loved it as much as I feel like I should. Always enjoyed it, always really enjoyed it, but it was one I was so excited for, and instead of being like here, it's always like here to me. Way up there, really enjoy it. Look at the placement on the ranking. Don't want you to misunderstand that. But it doesn't also kind of reach kind of the full upper heights of that I feel that it should in light of the genre, style, cast, all of that fun stuff. Number 7, Terrifier 3. Now, I went into Terrifier 2 a couple years back at Fantastic Fest. Really no expectations. I was brand new to the franchise. I watched the first movie just a couple days before and was like, okay, it's like a low-budget slasher with a little bit of charm. Okay, what am I in for? And as we'll talk about soon, very impressed by that film, with what they were able to do with their budget and how they expanded the lore and elevated a franchise that seemed, very grindhouse B-movie. And Terrifier 3, I think, is a great complement to Part 2. It's a great follow-up that is able to continue all of the things that I enjoyed about the first film, or the second film, without just rehashing it. And what some of that is that it dials back a little bit of the more kind of fantastical elements that are in Part 2, and magic daggers and people in costumes and stuff like that. And so it's maybe less playful in that sense, and it's meaner, but then it adds a Christmas skin on top of it, which adds its own playfulness.
And he just said, you should think about putting Art the Clown in Christmas. That would be awesome. It was like something that simple. And as soon as he said it, it just clicked. It felt natural. It's such a joyous, wholesome, family-oriented holiday. It's holy. So I thought everything Art the Clown's not So then to bring that character into that, it's perfect. Put art in all those Christmas trope situations, especially to get a lot of levity out of those scenarios. Like, what would it be like for Art the Clown to suddenly be a mall Santa surrounded by all these children? Like, that could be really disturbing, but also very funny. He could do a lot of quirky stuff there. What would it be like if Art actually interacted with who he thought was the real Santa Claus? Like, how funny would that be?
It finds its own way to be entertaining, subversive, dark, and disturbing, while always having a wink in there, always having that fun and playing around with some of the ideas that you can do with that. And then also with the characters, it actually has them grow and change from the previous film, where in part 2, these characters go through something horrible, and the town does too. And in this movie, they're changed. They have survivor's guilt. The town is different. And so it's a Terrifier movie. It's all about the shocking gore and everything like that. And at the same time, it still spends a lot of time on the characters. Spends a lot of time trying to do something that matters there.
Because you're kind of in that survivor's guilt chapter, I assume. For
I'd
the
say
third
so.
One. So that's kind of a common thing. So is there any character, Laurie Strode, or anybody like that?
I mean, one of my favorites that we didn't really discuss, Damien and I, is Mia Allen from the Evil Dead franchise, and she definitely goes through a lot of guilt. She goes through a lot in the 2013 movie, and I'd say they all influenced, especially probably Mia the most, because she's a bit unhinged in that movie, and I get to be a bit unhinged in here, so I'm very excited about that, and hopefully it translated well.
We'll see. I love that movie, so I'll be able to see if it's there or not.
Yeah, you'll have to let me know.
I thought it was a great compliment to part 2. I don't think it had the surprise that 2 had. That's why I have 2 higher on the list, but very much a film that I enjoyed and did not disappoint. Number 6, Abigail. Latest film from Radio Silence. I actually got to see this one at its world premiere at the Overlook Film Festival and worked the red carpet with Cody Leach.
I love isolated horror. Your movies trap people in these horrifying environments where they're in danger. What draws you to trapping people in dangerous locations, and what are some of the movies that inspired you to want to tell those types of stories?
It's funny. I think because of the way we came up, where we would find a location and then go, oh, we can shoot there. That's our production value. Let's go shoot there. It sort of informed us in terms of location being really, really important. And I think since then...
Yeah, and on a budget.
On a budget.
Yeah.
And it really allows the characters to be front and center in a way that I think we really like. We kind of joke that we always end up doing ensemble movies. And then that... putting a bunch of people in an enclosed location, just like you said.
Pressure cooker.
Yeah, it's a pressure cooker, and we just love it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Once again, a movie that just feels very much like my kind of thing, where isolated survival horror film with a gimmick to it, where you've got a vampire ballerina killing people, but there's other stuff kind of going on as well. You have a really fun ensemble of characters where it's just like the right blend of people, and the directors talked about how they wanted it to kind of be sort of like Breakfast Club, except as a horror movie with grown-ups. I was like, yeah, I kind of get what you're saying with that. And so for me, a genre that I like, it's a lot of fun, characters that I thought meshed well together, so just a really good time. Then we have Longlegs, and this is a movie that a lot of people loved. A lot of people called it the scariest movie in forever. And a lot of people were disappointed by it because it had been so overhyped by a bunch of people, so it disappointed others that kind of saw it after all of the hype. I was lucky enough to watch it right on the rise of the hype, but not at the peak of the hype. So I got to be a part of like this pleasant surprise. I think I'd seen a trailer too, but didn't know much about it. Like went in knowing very little about the film, very vague images in my mind of like serial killers, kind of all I knew going into it. And I thought it was just such a great throwback serial killer movie, where it has flavors of Silence of the Lambs, Seven, Zodiac, but it's also very much its own thing. And in particular, creates its own feeling. And so much of that is the cameras that were used. where all the shots are like with these wide angle lenses that are kind of framed, kind of like the way the mine are framed, but you're just following this person in the middle of the screen. And there's all this empty space. And the movie does a great job of making you pay attention to what's going on in the background and just feel unease. You feel this tension waiting for something to happen outside of the main person. And almost the whole movie has these shots that put so much focus on the main person, but leave so much room for everything else. And the sound design complements all of that. I just loved that aspect of the movie.
I mean, it's the Stanley Kubrick thing, right? Like The Shining does that over and over and over again. And Kubrick's use of lenses, I think that's something that filmmakers probably, certainly myself as a younger person, noticed right away, is the use of wide angle lenses, really wide angle lenses, 16s and 18s and 14s and things, create that weird distance and that weird sort of warped sense of space, and the kind of uneasiness that comes with that. The off-balance way of looking at the world through such a wide lens really does put you in an off spot.
And then, we just haven't had a lot of these serial killer movies like this. So for me, it was just one that very much was a very pleasant surprise this year. Number 4, Terrifier 2. As I mentioned when talking about Terrifier 3, I was very new to the franchise when I saw this film, had no expectations, was very confused as to why it was 2.5 hours long, and it was such a pleasant surprise. It helped that, my expectations were limited, and I watched it in the best possible context at a midnight showing at Fantastic Fest with the director, Art the Clown, in the row in front of me. Chris Stuckman was there. I'm sitting next to Cody Leach. Very lively audience. It was opening night of the festival. Everyone was pumped to be there. And then the movie so exceeded my expectations. And the big thing on that for me is that I just kind of loved the direction that Damien took things, where he brought in all of these kind of outside influences and built out this lore that I just thought was a ton of fun.
Yeah, it's very, very comic book level, part 2. It went a very tonally different direction. For one, because I really love the sword and sorcery genre from the 80s, like Conan and Beastmaster, Red Sonja, Excalibur. Those are some of my favorite movies.
And even beyond that, there's a little bit of Friday the 13th, Dream Warriors in there.
Because I feel like part 2 was sort of my Dream Warriors, where it became more poppy and more fantastic, especially with the fantasy element.
And there's just different flavors that was added to it, with Art the Clown already being fun, that you just kind of makes for a really interesting experience that has this mythological side to it, and it leans so heavily into that, even with the Sienna character and how she's dressed with a magic dagger, that it's it just goes for it. That was so fun to me. While Art the Clown continues to kind of do his shtick, there's all the shocking gore and horror and all the stuff that you get in a Terrifier movie, but a lore that elevated it for me. Real quick, before I give you my top 3, remember to join me down below in the comments section. Share your ranking of all 31 movies, or at least as many as you've seen. My list is not the right list. It's just my list. I would love to see yours. And if you want to see other people's lists, be sure to check out the videos from the other members of the Autop stream. Cody Leach, CP, Brian Lomax, Rudy. All of us have very different perspectives on these films. And, in particular with this list, some of the ones that people pushed to get them in here is because I really dug them. Some of us really did not like them, and vice versa. And so this one will be very interesting. I really don't even know where they're going to land a lot of these movies. It should be a fun one. But anyway, be sure to join me below. Check out everybody else's videos. In third, Don't Breathe. I really enjoy Fede Alvarez and his bag of tricks. And as we've talked about multiple times in here before, really enjoy isolated survival horror movies. And that's what Don't Breathe is. That people go into a house and they're stuck there trying to survive while this crazy blind man is protecting his house, plus something he's got stored up in his basement. And another one that just so effectively finds a way to put people in this pressure cooker environment introduces a set of rules, scares, environmental elements, and then just plays with those all throughout the movie. It sets up a set of rules and then challenges them later on, or uses those rules as ways to escape, ways to put people in danger. And then at just the right point in time in the movie where you think you might be overstaying its welcome, throws this wild, crazy twist into things, cranks things up to this whole other level, adds a gross out factor into the film that just elevates it in all of the right ways. I think the blind man character is just such a great antagonist that is feels so justified in everything that he's doing, and in some of the things he's doing, he is justified, and also so crazy and extreme that he's very much a villain in all of these other ways, and a twisted one at that. And that's when you got a great character where there's a lot of different things that you feel about them, and the character is the hero of their own story and believes they are justified in their actions. And Fede Alvarez is just so good with using the environment to create the tension. Speaking of Fede Alvarez, our runner-up, Alien Romulus. Two things, kind of three things I thoroughly enjoy. The Alien franchise, at least the ones that feel like the first two movies, Fede Alvarez direction, and close quarters survival horror. And what if you combine those all together, where you did the Fede Alvarez thing in the Alien franchise, which Alien was already the Fede Alvarez thing. And so a guy that loves the first two Alien movies, who's very good at making those types of movies, getting to play in that playground. And so he's brought in this absolute love for this world, this mythology, this atmosphere, and did everything he could to perfectly replicate that in the environments of those films, and then does his bag of tricks of setting up a set of rules, a set of environmental conditions that create the tension in the back half of the film, that also create the opportunities in the back half of the film. And a movie that in many ways takes advantage of what you can do in the 21st century with technology, but also that's very heavily committed to going as practical as is possible. And for that reason, it is, I think it's easily the third best movie in the Alien franchise, delivers a great alien experience. You know, I think they messed up with digital resurrections. Like, I'm not offended by it. I just don't think it worked very well. And my wife proposed, like, what if you'd done that same thing, but don't have the guy on the table, just do it when it's on the TV screen like this. Whenever it's on the TV screen, it looked fine. But whenever they did it in person, it just looked off and wrong. And so I think they had a missed opportunity to do something in a way that would work much better than what they did in the final film. Not crazy about the last 10 minutes, but it's the sort of thing where I left the theater and was like, I don't know how I feel about a couple of things there. And with time in a second viewing, I was like, no, that is very much my thing. Fede, you did it. But coming in at number one, Get Out, a movie that was so powerful, it entirely rebranded Jordan Peele, who was already an incredibly successful actor, comedian, performer with all of these iconic sketches on his show, Key and Peele, and with one movie went from one of the funniest people of the last decade to becoming one of the most interesting directors of the last decade. And in a totally different genre. Like, there are some connective tissue between what the Key and Peele sketches were and the way that they were really funny, but a lot of them had a lot of social commentary in them as well, and that's what they're playing off of. That idea is there, but of course it's applied to this totally different genre, where he makes this movie that it's a horror film. It's got a lot of Twilight Zone vibes to it. It also has a dark sense of humor, and there's social commentary baked into the whole thing. And it's able to kind of seamlessly weave all of those together. It doesn't feel forced. The metaphors and commentary aren't overdone. It's all just like feels, or not just feels, it's all very intelligent. It's very smart. Balances it all so well. And if anything, I think it almost kind of like set him up for failure because it's such a good debut film with such a distinct perspective and wit to it that it almost becomes tricky to live up to what he did with this film. And even the way that you're going through the film, and as the reveals happen, they feel like, oh, and they're horrifying on the immediate level of, oh, that's messed up. And then you pause to think about what it means on a thematic level, as means like the dehumanizing, not just the killing people level, but the dehumanizing level of it, and using people as a skin, like just you keep thinking about it is more and more horrifying the deeper you go in on it. And so for me, just one of these movies that has gotten better with time. It gets better the more you think about it. And like I said, a movie that maybe set Jordan Peele up for failure because it was so successful on so many different levels that created unrealistic expectations for the rest of his career that I feel like he keeps trying to live up to while not having nearly as good of metaphors and ideas, or it hasn't done nearly as good of a job balancing all the things as he was able to do in this movie. But all that to say, it comes in at number 1. Now that you've seen my video, be sure to check out everybody else's videos. Check out Cody's, Brian's, CP's, Rudy's videos, all of our different opinions, our different perspectives. These ones in particular, I think we're gonna have very different perspectives on these films. Thank you so much for watching. Keep talking movies and TV too much. Bye-bye.